Over the last couple of weeks here on the program, if you've noticed, we are trying to explain to you what's been going on, not necessarily behind the scenes, but regarding agendas. And if you haven't noticed, that information collection on the part of government has become a very, very important part of things. I want to do something we haven't done in a long time here, much to my chagrin, which was brought to my attention recently. We used to cover education issues much more intensely back in the 1990s, and we started with Goals 2000, No Child Left Behind, Parents as Teachers, Race to the Top. That was another one there, which I call Race to the Bottom. And now we have Common Core curriculum. I don't think most parents understand where this is coming from, where this is going to, and you only know it by researching the background to the laws that are going in and what the educratic elites are saying. And a guest I used to have on the program very regularly was Anita Hoge. I'm glad to see that she's in the battle again, swinging on this, and is probably the most adroit voice telling us exactly what Common Core is all about. And this has been the long-term push, has been to have a national school what would you call it, Anita? Is it a curriculum or just a national school system, meaning that the states are marching in lockstep with whatever the federal government wants to do?
Basically what you just said, the agenda is to nationalize education. Okay, so that you have no local control, you have no control over your taxes, you have no voice, you have no recourse as far as what will happen in the future on your local level. So it's a movement to nationalize the curriculum, nationalize the testing, nationalize the teacher certification, so that the federal government is in control of everything. And now with the technology up to speed, you have the data collection on individuals. Now let me just say this. When you think about the violations of privacy that were exposed by Edward Snowden, to the NSA monitoring emails and phone conversations, honestly, Snowden's release of this information is child's play compared to what the government is collecting on your student and on your family. And we have been able to prove it in Pennsylvania. And just recently, over the Christmas holidays, I gave the nation a Christmas gift. I called it the Christmas Gift to America 2014, which was I gave every state a link to where they could go to look for their state's contract with the National Center of Education Statistics, and that's just a department within the Federal Department of Ed that collects data on your children. And this link will show you how the federal government is creating what they called a unique national ID on individuals. It's called a state longitudinal data system, and all that means is they're collecting information, personally identifiable information on your children and on your family. And this is really what the technology part is all about.
Okay, that's the technology. Now let's look at it in Common Core.
When we're talking about Common Core was actually, let's call it the instrument. It was the mandate that was coming down that allowed the federal government to say, you have to meet specific standards. So what had happened during that time, and this was in, I believe it was 2008, I don't know the exact date, I'd have to go back and look at the copyright. So what happened was the chief state school officers, and all that is another nonprofit group who are the Secretary of Ed or the state superintendents of every state. So they're in their little club. So this little club called the Chief State School Officers and the National Governors Association copyrighted these standards and called them Common Core. So what you have to think about is there were three major national actions that were taken during the Obama administration without legislative approval that changed 200 years of traditional public education in the United States. And what happened is this was the beginning of tracking and trafficking of personally identifiable information on your students. So when you think of Common Core, which is really the old OBE, outcome-based education that we were fighting in the 90s, where we were very successful back then is we demanded, and we did win, that they could not mandate to the individual. So in Pennsylvania, in all the different states where we traveled, and I spoke all over the country, and many other people too, to fight outcome-based education, we did defend the right that we still had somewhat of local control and that the teacher in the classroom would create the standards. What did the Common Core copyright do? So the chiefs and the governors copyrighted the old OBE standards, okay? And where those standards came from was from the Department of Labor, honestly, the Department of Labor. And there's a document, and you can still get it. It's called the SCANS, S-C-A-N-S.
Boy, does that bring back memories.
And what Department of Labor document said, and it was the prototype of the future worker of tomorrow, what they wanted the future worker of tomorrow to look like. They had a resume. I think you remember that. The resume that they had where there were personal skills and they had proficiency levels for things like interpersonal skills, honesty, integrity, responsibility, cooperating with others. And I had developed the 5 magic questions, I called them. Google and put Hoge 5 magic questions, and they'll come up. And what this did was it explained to people why you can't have these standards as a standard in your school. Because the first question is, well, how do you measure honesty? How do you measure getting along with others? How do you measure ethical judgment? How do you measure interpersonal skills? So immediately you begin to think someone is putting a standard on something that's subjective. And yes, that is your government. And the second aspect to that is, well, gee, how do you score something like that? If you're going to have a proficiency in interpersonal skills, how do you score that? The third thing, how do you remediate that? Or what kind of curriculum? Or what are you going to do to my child to make them change from where they are in their personalities and where the government wants them to be? And then the most important, what if the parent and the government disagree? What if the parent and the state disagree? So this was the whole agenda at that time.
I'm glad you brought that up, because remember we were talking about scans, and it seemed like the government was creating worker bees. In other words, the goal was not to educate people. It was to create worker bees to fit into this new modeled society as they envision it. Now, has there been something pretty seamless, if we go back to the 1989 Governors Conference on Education, through Goals 2000, outcome-based education, parents as teachers, race to the top. This agenda has just rolled forward under the Bushes, under the Clintons, under Obama. That's true, isn't it?
Absolutely. And this is what's going to bring us forward now. This has been, every administration has brought this forward. And the Obama administration has actually done 3 things to undo traditional education, but it is the Republicans that are pushing through legislation right now that will make it law. And this is called the ESEA, and we're saying no way ESEA, because this is the new reauthorization of No Child Left Behind from the Bush years. So let me go to the second point, okay, because I'm going to get to that, what happened. First, you had Common Core, created the national curriculum, national testing, mandates to the individual student, mandates individual standards, and I always say this, similar to Obamacare, individual mandates, but it standardized all of the data elements or data collection in every state. And when I say it's similar to Obamacare, the individual mandate, and everyone was confused when I said that, but if you hate Obamacare, you're going to hate Common Core. And the reason that you're going to hate it is because it mandates that your individual child has to meet specific government outcomes in order to graduate. Same thing, exact same thing, nationalizing education. So the second thing that Obama did is that through an executive order, it's Executive Order 12866, if anyone looks it up, just look up Family Education Rights and Privacy, which is FERPA. This is the law that protects your kids in the past. Obama, through an executive order, changed FERPA so that third-party vendors and contractors can access personally identifiable information on your children. So FERPA was changed. It went into effect January 3rd of 2012. When that happened, I went berserk. Why? Because I understood what that meant. That meant there were going to be contracts given to every state for a state longitudinal data system to monitor individuals. And that's exactly what happened.
Anita Hoge is our guest right now. She's been actively involved in the area of tracking the education agenda of the educrats for 20 years now. And we're discussing where Common Core curriculum is actually taking us. And it's a feedback information loop in this new sort of dumbed down society that the educrats have envisioned. And so we're taking our time to go through this, but this is really important. It's going to lock into what Pat Wood will talk about in upcoming shows on the subject of technocracy. If you just Google Anita Hoge, A-N-I-T-A, and then H-O-G-E, a lot of her articles will come up. We'll be back. Remember to follow us on Facebook. We're at steelonsteel.com. I'm John Leffler. The program is Steel on Steel. Anita Hoge, our guest today. Welcome back to Steel on Steel. John Leffler here with you, examining Common Core curriculum. We're going to spend this entire half hour, not so much item by item. People are debating these standards and all of this nonsense. What most of the debate going on out there is not encompassing is, where is this all going? Where did it start? What is the flow of ideas? And we can trace it all the way back to the 1980s that educrats have incorporated into these on-rolling agendas that have rolled through the presidencies of Bush 1, Clinton, Bush 2, Obama. It really hasn't made any difference. Anita Hoge's been a long-time documenter of these trends. And if you go back and look at what it was the educrats said they wanted to do when we came out of the 1989 Governor's Conference on Education, whose keynote speaker was Dr. Shirley McCune, they're creating a workforce group. They don't want people to be exceptionally well educated, only to have enough skills to run computers and enough spelling to be able to read and write and fill out forms and things like that. It's a complete remake of education. It's a radical remake. And of course, the outcomes, the ultimate outcomes, are never told to the parents. They're always painted in very glowing terms. Excellence in education, you know, we're a #1 school. You see all of this glop and nonsense. And in reality, the quality of education just continues through all of this stuff to decline. There's never been reform. I maintain, for the most part, it can't be reformed. You have to simply abolish what we have now, and you don't do that by necessarily formally putting something through. What you do is you just have people exit their kids, except that now, I think we're going to talk about this, exiting your children from the system may become close to impossible because even private homeschool kids will have to meet certain outcomes. This is all a giant feedback loop. You'll start with a folder, a digital folder, of course, that will follow you all of your life through school, and it will probably follow you into the workplace, and on it measures attitudes, values, and beliefs, not just academic scores. And so this is as socialist as you can possibly want to get in this whole thing, except we don't want to get there. The problem is right now, both Socialist Party D and Socialist Party R are working on this. And as I've said quite frequently, Democrats bring all the new changes in and Republicans make them permanent. And that's exactly what we're seeing. Anita, let's pick up from the whole thing. We were talking about the SCANS report and the Elementary and Secondary Education Authorization Act, along with contracts that are being given to private companies to database your school kids, to have access to their private information. And of course, the question we have to ask now, whenever anybody wants to talk about using our information, healthcare, educational, or otherwise, who will have access to this and what will they do with it?
There was